At 4 a.m., the border was silent. Nothing moved. Then, headlights. One truck. Then 10. Then 57. In the dead of night, a convoy crept across the Burkina Faso-Togo border, disguised as aid. But they weren't carrying rice or medicine. They carried death. Inside those trucks, AK-47s, M16s, rocket launchers, grenades, 50 tons of explosives, enough to turn an entire country into a war zone. Estimated value, $700 million. This wasn't charity. This was war, hidden under a white flag. But someone was watching. One man, Ibrahim Traore Burkina Faso, the president they underestimated, said no. Not today, not on this land, not to this people. And with one decision, he didn't just stop the weapons. He stopped a coup. He stopped chaos. He stopped history from repeating itself. Stay with us, because this isn't just another story. It's the future our ancestors dreamed of. Subscribe and stand with us for an Africa that will never bow again. It was just before dawn on August 16, 2025. The borderlands of Burkina Faso lay still. No sound, no lights, just darkness. Until a patrol unit noticed something strange. A convoy, dozens of trucks, moving slowly, quietly, too quietly. At an hour when the roads are empty, they rolled in, one after the other, hugging the shadows. Captain Musa Kabori, stationed near Canary, didn't wait. He radioed in. Something didn't feel right. These trucks weren't taking the main road. They were slinking through the back routes, unmarked. The drivers claimed they carried humanitarian aid, food, medicine, relief supplies. But who delivers aid at 4 a.m.? And why on dirt paths? Word reached Burkina Faso President Ibrahim Traore. He didn't blink. He didn't stall. He called General Ibrahim Zerbo, head of special forces, and he issued one order: intercept, secure, do not lose a single truck, and be careful. This might be bigger than we think. Then the trap was set. Drones began circling above. Helicopters hovered in the clouds. Soldiers moved in silence, weaving through the terrain. And then, at precisely 4 a.m., the road was sealed. The trucks were surrounded. Drivers panicked, tried to reverse. Some ran, but they didn't get far. Within minutes, the first truck was open. And what they saw stopped hearts cold. AK-47s, M16s, grenades, rocket launchers, anti-aircraft missiles, stacked beneath bags labeled emergency food assistance. Mr. President, Captain Kabor radioed, voice shaking, this is a full-blown arsenal. Not one truck, all of them. Traoré didn't hesitate. Secure everything, he said, and make those drivers talk. We need names. We need routes. We need the truth. Someone is planning a war on our soil, and he was right. The next 48 hours would unveil a plot so deep, so wide, it would shock the continent. The first captured driver, Mark Antoine Zongo, cracked under pressure. He confessed, "They told us we were transporting farm machinery, told us to drop it off in Togo. From there, it would be shipped." But investigators found something even darker. Each truck had left from a different location, different days, different routes, only joining at the border. It was a pattern, designed to avoid detection, to pass under every radar. And they almost succeeded. Almost. When forensic teams scraped the serial numbers off the weapons, what they discovered was damning. Many were leftovers from Libya's fall. Some had seen action in Yemen. A few were brand new, never fired, still smelling of factory grease. But who paid for all this? Who had the means to fund $700 million worth of war? That was the question President Traoré kept asking, and he wasn't going to rest until he had the answer. Because this wasn't smuggling. This was strategy. This was sabotage. This was an attempt to drown Burkina Faso in blood. But Burkina Faso President Ibrahim Traoré was not about to let history repeat itself. Not like Libya, not like Syria, not like Mali. Burkina Faso was wide awake. If you think this wasn't a mistake, but a message, type "We see you" in the comments. By the second day, the lies began to unravel. More drivers were questioned. Most knew nothing, just hired hands. But one name kept coming up: Francois Bongo, a powerful businessman, a familiar face in political circles, and, as it would turn out, a traitor. He was arrested during the second wave of raids. He resisted at first, but when shown the seized weapons, the routes, the bank records, he broke. He sat in the interrogation room trembling. "This wasn't just smuggling," he whispered. "This was phase one." Then he dropped the bombshell. Foreign powers had promised support. The plan was months in the making. The goal? Overthrow President Traoré and install a pro-Western puppet regime, one that would hand over mining contracts, privatize land, and reopen military bases. The operation had a name: Operation Restore Democracy. Sound familiar? Because it should. That name and that lie has haunted every African country that dared to stand up. Iraq, Libya, Syria, Haiti, now Burkina Faso. Bongo confessed. Planning meetings were held in Accra. Delegates came from Abidjan, but the instructions? They came from Paris. And the green light? Washington. The room froze. President Traoré leaned forward and asked the million-dollar question. Who else was involved? And Bongo started naming names. Retired generals, ex-ministers, CEOs, even foreign diplomats with diplomatic passports, but no diplomatic missions. They weren't here for peace. They were here for power. And the scariest part? The plan was already underway. Stage terror attacks to create fear. Use that panic to rally opposition groups. With chaos in the streets, trigger a military mutiny from within. Overthrow the elected government. Install the puppet. Declare democracy restored. And to the world, just another African nation needing help. But this time, they were caught. Thanks to one man who didn't blink, who didn't wait for permission, who didn't fear the backlash. Ibrahim Traore Burkina Faso had pulled the curtain back. And what the world saw was ugly. This was not politics, this was betrayal. And the weapons? They weren't the worst part. The real crime was the blueprint, the arrogance of it. They had already drawn up a new cabinet, a full list of ministers, even their first economic policy: open all mining rights to foreign companies. They were ready to rule before a single shot had been fired. But they forgot one thing. Burkina Faso is no longer asleep. If you believe this was no coincidence, write Africa awake below. As investigators dug deeper, what they uncovered sent shockwaves through every corridor of power, from Ouagadougou to Brussels. They traced the weapons. Some were leftovers from Libya's civil war, stolen from Gaddafi's old stockpiles. Others had markings from Yemen, still dusted with desert sand. But most shocking, some rifles were brand new, never used, still sealed in crates. Serial numbers linked them to factories in NATO countries, Western companies. Traoré stood before his National Security Council and read the inventory aloud. 25,000 AK-47s, 10,000 M16s, 13 million rounds of ammunition, 2,500 rocket launchers, 70,000 grenades, 400 anti-aircraft missiles, 50 tons of military-grade explosives. Defense Minister General Sadu stared at the list and said grimly, "With this firepower, you could invade a nation." And they nearly did. Investigators followed the money. What they found was even worse. The financial trail began in the Gulf, flowed through European banks, and ended in shell corporations registered in offshore tax havens. The same networks used by traffickers, arms dealers, and, yes, intelligence agencies. Total budget for Operation Restore Democracy? $1 billion. This wasn't a local conspiracy. It was global. It was calculated. It was cold. The names revealed were shocking. Among the suspects arrested during raids in Ouagadougou were former government ministers, retired military officers, corporate CEOs, NGO directors, and 7 foreign nationals, 3 French, 2 British, 1 American, and 1 Israeli, all carrying diplomatic passports. But here's the twist. None of them were actual diplomats. They were agents, operatives, frontmen, and all of them had one thing in common. They opposed the Traoré administration's refusal to bow to foreign interests. In court, their faces said it all. Some wept. Some stayed silent. One muttered, "We were promised protection." But Burkina Faso President Ibrahim Traoré made it clear, no passport gives you the right to destroy our democracy. As international pressure mounted, With threats of sanctions, frozen aid, and diplomatic outrage, Traoré stood firm, and the world began to shift. Russia stepped forward. Traoré has every right to defend his nation. China offered security equipment. Turkey declared, Africa's security is our security. Iran issued a blunt warning, imperialist games must end. And Venezuela's President Maduro called Traoré Africa's Simon Bolivar, but Traoré didn't celebrate. He called another press conference, and this time he held up the documents. Files recovered from laptops, phones, and secret meetings. What they revealed was terrifying. This wasn't just about Burkina Faso. Mali was targeted. Niger, Guinea, Nigeria. The entire Sahel region was in the crosshairs. Each nation had its own version of Operation Restore Democracy. Same script, different actors. This was a continental coup attempt. But they were caught because Ibrahim Traore Burkina Faso refused to sleep. He looked at the cameras and said, the masks are off. The people now know. The continent now knows. We will not kneel. We will not be fooled. Not again. Do you believe they ever stopped colonizing us? Type "not fooled" if you see the pattern. 3 days after the seizure, President Traoré stood before a sea of microphones. Behind him stood not bodyguards, but towers of weapons, seized rifles, stacked crates, missiles, ammunition belts. It looked like a battlefield, but this was a press conference. My fellow Burkinabe, he began, his voice steady, firm, cold. This was not just smuggling. This was not petty crime. This was war, hidden in plain sight. He lifted a stack of classified documents. Here is the proof. 57 trucks, $700 million in arms. Their goal? Plunge Burkina Faso into chaos. Divide us. Use our own soil to destroy us. Then came the turning point. He played a video. The screen lit up. Francois Bongo, the traitor-turned-confessor, appeared. Tears streamed down his face. His voice cracked. They told us we'd be heroes, that we'd bring order, but we were just pawns. This wasn't about democracy. It was about control. I betrayed my people. I was wrong. I am sorry. Silence. No journalist moved. Then Traoré leaned forward. Where did the weapons come from? He paused, then answered his own question. Some were made in NATO countries, some in the Gulf. The rest were paid for by enemies hiding in plain sight. He didn't name every nation, but the message was unmistakable. The room erupted. CNN asked, which countries are involved? Traoré, we're still investigating, but we know some of the weapons were manufactured in Western factories. BBC pressed, who orchestrated this? Traoré, 17 individuals arrested so far. More to come. We will not stop. Al Jazeera asked, what does this mean for the region? Traoré didn't flinch. This is not just an attack on Burkina Faso. This is an attack on Africa. Then came the quote that shattered the mask of silence. We are the grandchildren of Thomas Sankara, and we will not kneel to anyone. Those words swept across the continent, from Dakar to Dar es Salaam, from Kinshasa to Cape Town. A leader had spoken, not with fear, not with compromise, but with fire. That same evening, President Traoré addressed the nation again, this time from Independence Square. Tens of thousands gathered. Women waved flags. Elderly men wept. Children climbed shoulders to see their president. He stood before the crowd and said, they tried to destroy our country before even lifting a finger. They wrote up our ministries, our cabinet, our future, without us. But they forgot one thing. He raised his hand. The people of Burkina Faso own this land, not them. Then with cameras rolling, the first confiscated rifle was dropped into a massive furnace. The fire hissed. This rifle was meant to kill your children, he said. But now we will melt it and build schools. Cheers, tears, history. And that was just the beginning. If this speech gave you chills, say, Rise Africa in the comments. The next morning, the sun rose on a different Burkina Faso. Not a nation wounded, but a nation reborn. In every village, people gathered around radios, TVs, phones, watching history unfold. And then came the announcement. With the funds from melted weapons, President Traoré declared, we will build 100 new schools, 50 health clinics, and 1,000 kilometers of irrigation canals. The crowd gasped. then erupted. This was no longer about stopping a coup. This was about flipping the narrative, taking the very tools of death and forging them into instruments of life. That same afternoon, a massive steel cauldron was wheeled into Independence Square. Before tens of thousands of witnesses, the first rifle, once destined to kill, was dropped into the fire. The metal hissed, melted, then flowed into a mold. Traoré lifted it. "This is a school bell," he said. "And every morning when our children hear it ring, they will be hearing the sound of peace." People wept, embraced, chanted his name. From that moment forward, August 18th was declared National Awakening and Victory Day. In every school, students would learn this story, not from textbooks written overseas, but from truth spoken in their mother tongue. And the message was clear. Burkina Faso had stopped an invasion not with bullets, but with unity. Meanwhile, the investigation reached its final phase. Interpol, armed with evidence from Burkina Faso's intelligence agency, launched an international crackdown. Arrests were made in Europe, assets frozen in offshore accounts. A web of bankers, arms dealers, and political consultants found themselves exposed. And Africa, for once, wasn't just reacting, it was leading. One headline from Nairobi read, "Burkina Faso president teaches the world how to fight a silent war with truth." Another in Johannesburg said, "From colonized to commander, Ibrahim Traore changes Africa's course." It wasn't just about Burkina Faso anymore. Mali, Niger, Guinea, they stood up. They saw the playbook and said, "No more." And it all started with 57 trucks and one man who dared to stop them. He didn't just disarm a conspiracy, he awakened a continent. If this is the Africa you've always dreamed of, write "It's time" below. This was never just about guns. It was about dignity. It was about the right to decide your own future. Without whispers from Paris, without pressure from Washington, without puppet strings hidden in aid, 57 trucks tried to sneak in the darkness. But Burkina Faso stood in the light because one man, Burkina Faso President Ibrahim Traore, said enough. Enough betrayal, enough silence, enough pretending Africa needs permission to exist. Instead of surrendering, he melted rifles into school bells. Instead of fear, he gave hope. Instead of hiding, he stood before the world and spoke truth, not with caution, but with courage. And that truth lit a fire across the continent. From now on, this story won't be buried in UN reports. It won't be rewritten in colonial fonts. It will be told, loudly, by the people who lived it, in classrooms, in village squares, in every African heartbeat that says, "We will not bow." So to those watching, this is your moment too. Because if they can do this to Burkina Faso, they can do it to your country. But if Burkina Faso can resist, then so can you. If this story stirred your soul, don't just scroll. Like, share, speak, subscribe. They've silenced us long enough. Now it's our time to speak history into the future. Comment below, New Africa, Africa Rise. Deputy Ibrahim the Bold, Padirn. School bells, not bullets, or tell us, what would you build from melted weapons? Let's write Africa's new chapter together.